Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching Russian History Virtual Tour Series, dedicated to the 350th anniversary of Peter the Great. My name is Alexander Arefiev. I am Press Attaché of the Russian Embassy in South Africa. By 1709, hardly anyone in Europe doubted that the victory of Sweden over Russia was inevitable. Russia was left alone after its former allies, Denmark, Saxony and Poland, were defeated, while the results of profound and all-embracing reforms launched by Peter I were not yet tangible. The might of Sweden's army and navy still seemed unquestionable. Realizing that he had neither enough resources nor enough men to gain control over all Russian lands, Sweden's King Charles XII decided to direct his attacks straight at Moscow and led his troops into the invasion in 1708. Troubles with supplies, which his army, stranded far from Sweden, started to experience shortly afterwards, highlighted the need to find a place to settle for some time and prepare for a decisive and victorious campaign. That is when Ivan Mazepa, hetman of the Zaporozhian host in Malorossia, which is present-day Ukraine, decided to betray his loyalty to the Russian Tsar and pledge allegiance to the Swedish king. He suggested that Charles XII should postpone his plans to besiege Moscow and spend the winter of 1708-1709, which turned out to be the coldest in centenary, in Ukraine. He also offered 50,000 men, horses, food and arms. Charles XII accepted the offer. In modern Ukraine, the Kiev regime plants the myth of Mazepa as a fighter for freedom of Ukraine. In reality, though, he was no freedom fighter. According to plans of Charles XII and Stanislav Leszczyński, pro-Swedish king of Poland installed by Charles, the territory of modern Ukraine, historically known as Little Russia, was to be seized by Poland after Russia's defeat. As for Mazepa, he was to be granted a title of prince and given some provinces of Little Russia. Under Russian Tsars, Little Russia was granted a vaster autonomy. Besides, Mazepa was ready to willingly sacrifice Little Russia to Poland exclusively for his personal benefit. What kind of fight for freedom is that? As a side note, have you ever wondered why do Ukraine's and Sweden's state flags share the same colors? According to one of the versions, this was a direct consequence of Mazepa's betrayal of Russia and siding with Sweden. Before the Battle of Poltava, the Cossacks of Mazepa used yellow and blue belts from Sweden's soldiers' uniform. They did this so that the Swedish commanders could distinguish them from those Cossacks who remained loyal to Russia. Anyway, despite Mazepa's promises, the locals mostly refused to cooperate with the Swedes, seeing them mainly as foreigners with different culture, language and religion, and therefore conquerors. As a result, the army he gathered was 5 times smaller in numbers than he promised. In April 1709, Charles XII attempted to take the city of Poltava, known inter alia for its gunpowder factories. The success of its siege would have also paved the way to the city of Voronezh, a key logistic hub of the Russian army. Yet the Swedish king's days on the Russian soil were already numbered. Back in September 1708, the troops under the command of Peter I, consisting of 12 to 18,000 soldiers, intercepted the corps of Swedish General Adam Lewenhaupt, who was supposed to bring much anticipated supplies and 13 to 16,000 men to Charles XII. These events came down in history as the Battle of Lesnaya. It resulted in a strategically significant victory for Russia, since the Swedes eventually had to withdraw, leaving their king without any replenishment. In May 1709, Peter I reached Poltava with the army of more than 75,000 men. By then, Charles XII had up to 27,000 men deployed near the besieged city. The largest land battle of the Great Northern War, the Battle of Poltava, took place on 8th of July 1709 in 6 kilometers away from Poltava on a piece of rough terrain surrounded by forest. The Swedish infantry launched its attack at night. In 2 hours, their main forces managed to take 2 redoubts, only to find themselves under intense artillery shelling and gunfire. After severe hand-to-hand combat, the Swedes were forced to withdraw in disarray under the onslaught of the Russian army. Their remaining troops were chased down and finally defeated on the next day. Upon the whole, at the Battle of Poltava, around 9,000 Swedes were killed, with almost 3,000 taken prisoners, including several top-ranking officers. Russia lost 1,345 men dead and 3,290 wounded. Tsar Peter himself led Russian troops in the battlefield and even had his hat shot through. Charles XII, as well as Mazeppa, managed to flee for the Ottoman Empire. The king would return to Sweden only in 1715, while the traitor would die in 1709, away from his motherland. The decisive victory of the Russian army in the Battle of Poltava became a turning point in the Great Northern War. Charles XII spared no effort to bring the Ottoman Sultan into war with Russia. To make the Sultan oust the Swedish king, Peter I threatened the Ottomans with war. However, in response, Sultan Ahmed III, being under pressure from France and England, declared war on Russia himself in 1710. In 1711, Tsar Peter, in an attempt to bring the Christian vassals of the Ottoman Empire into fight with it, undertook a raid to Moldavia. The raid was unsuccessful, and since Russia could not wage war on two fronts, in 1713 Peter signs a peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire. A much-needed document, albeit an unfavorable one for Russia, since it lost access to the Sea of Azov. Again, Peter I concentrated on the war with Sweden. In 1713, the Swedes a defeat in Pomerania and lost all their territories in continental Europe. They were split between Prussia and Hanover. Russia gained control over Finland. The war dragged on and on due to Sweden's supremacy on sea and its gradually increasing support from European powers, primarily from England and France. However, the activity of Russian army in the Swedish mainland and successful efforts of Russian diplomats to block the foreign support of Sweden forced Charles XII to start the negotiations. In 1721, the peace treaty of Nystadt was signed. Peter proved himself to be a skillful diplomat. He realized that it would be a bad move to humiliate Sweden, so the treaty was drafted with its interest in mind as well. As a result, Sweden became a neutral country towards Russia, not hostile. The peace treaty included provisions for eternal peace between the two states, as well as a ban on joining any military alliance aimed against each other. Sweden officially ceded the rights of the Baltics and part of Karelia to Russia. In return, it received compensation in 2 million thalers as well as part of Finland. The Great Northern War has reached its conclusion. This war drastically changed the balance of power on the continent. The Swedish Empire conclusively lost its dominance in the Baltics and Europe, and to this extent it was replaced by the newly established Russian Empire. Hence, having cut a window to Europe, so to say, Russia joined the club of great powers for good. The demand of uninterrupted supplies of weapons and equipment during the war preconditioned the rapid development of Russian industry at the time, which in its turn entailed a significant increase in the level of education in the country. Russia invited the best specialists from abroad and sent its own nationals to study in Europe. This culminated in the foundation of the Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg in 1724. Peter the Great was among the first who vividly realized that his country was destined to be a bridge between Europe and Asia, connecting the White, Baltic, Black and Caspian Seas. Russia's proactive foreign policy during the war, as well as trade expansion, stipulated the establishment of diplomatic missions in the key European and Asian countries. The results of the Great Northern War made it clear that Russia turned the painful pages of the Livonian War of late 16th century and the time of troubles of early 17th century. It re-emerged as a new, reformed country with significant influence on European affairs, which could no longer be neglected. And that is all for today. My name is Alexander Arefiev, and this was Russian History Virtual Tour Series, dedicated to the 350th anniversary of Peter the Great. Thank you for watching.